Good afternoon, all. Welcome to the Get Outdoors PA webinar, Birds of a Feather, Get Outdoors Together, Birding 101. My name is Samantha Holbert, and I'm contracted with Pennsylvania Recreation and Park Society to be coordinator of the Get Outdoors PA program. Get Outdoors PA is a partnership of state agencies, statewide and community organizations, and recreation departments, all committed to providing outdoor recreation learning events in the communities that they serve. These events are intended to connect people to the outdoors in a meaningful way by offering year-round programs to help promote activities such as birding, nature photography, hiking, fishing, hunting. All participants during this session will be muted, but you may ask questions or make comments using the chat function in the lower left-hand corner of your screen throughout the session. And we will provide responses to your questions either during the session or at the end of the session. Links to the recording of the webinar presentation are available or will be available along with handouts from the session on our partner portal of our Get Outdoors PA website. If you're a partner currently of Get Outdoors PA, you will have access to that partner portal. If you're not, you'll have to become a partner in order to have access. The webinar has been approved for 0.1 CEUs, or 1 contact hour, and individuals who have purchased continuing education credit for this webinar have to attend this live webinar and take a quiz immediately following the presentation. The final presentation slide will have a link to the quiz. So with me this afternoon on the webinar are Peter Kurtz, who is an Environmental Education Program Specialist for Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. Pete, do you want to say hello?
Hello all.
Thanks, Pete. And Steven Safier, the Program Manager for Audubon, Pennsylvania.
Hi, everyone.
Mick Group, who's a naturalist at Strawberry Hill Nature Preserve.
Howdy, glad to be here.
Thanks, Mick. And then Joel Wagner, who is also a naturalist and an intern at Strawberry Hill Nature Preserve.
Hi, everybody.
So Peter graduated from Penn State. We'll talk to you a little bit about our speakers in 1976 with a degree in outdoor education. And he has professional experience at 9 sites in 5 states before coming to the Pennypack Environmental Center in 1986. He's been birding for over 50 years and has participated in Christmas bird counts since the 70s. In the past 20 years, he's been a compiler for the Pennypack Valley Count, and he's conducted a wide range of birding programs for school groups and the public. Steve has worked for the National Audubon Society since 2003 and at its state office in Pennsylvania since 2007. He's on the development committee of National Audubon's Bird Friendly Communities Initiative, which emphasizes the use of native plants in creating a bird habitat. This is in line with the statewide programs, the Bird Habitat Recognition Program and Bird Town Program, both of which encourage citizen science, such as the bird counts that we're going to be talking about today. Mick Group has been an avid outdoorsman his entire life and has served as a hunting guide, published outdoor writer, and photographer, environmental education program director, and photography instructor. He's also a member of the South Mountain Audubon chapter in Adams County. And Strawberry Hill affords Mick an opportunity to impart his knowledge of the natural world to visitors at the preserve. And our intern, Joel, who we're happy to have here today, is an environmental education intern at Strawberry Hill. He earned a degree in environmental interpretation from Penn State in May of last year and has worked as an educator for multiple nature centers across the country, including Shavers Creek and State College and Island Wood on Brainbridge Island in Washington. He's an avid birder and loves giving others the birding bug. So this webinar is intended for prospective partners and current partners to provide you with tools to connect as local providers of outdoor recreation and education to the resources to offer opportunities for enjoyment of watching, feeding, counting species of birds, learning how to develop a successful birding program from expert birders who will be offering helpful tips on finding the perfect place to observe birds, counting the species, finding program partners, and accessing equipment. So we're going to start first with Peter, and he's going to talk about basic birding programs, audience, skill level, location, something about equipment as well, and partner organizations. So Peter?
I'm on. Okay. Well,
yes.
I mean, the first thing I want to, for all the folks listening, and if you're thinking of doing birding programs somewhere in the state, birding has become one of the most popular hobbies in the country. It's estimated that there could be as many as 50 million people in the United States that do birding in some form, whether it's observing birds in their backyards or becoming a real birder who's out recording what they see. So it's really one of the fastest growing hobbies in the country, and there are lots of reasons for that. It's very easy to do. It's great exercise, and you can work other hobbies into birding. There are lots of birders that primarily take pictures of birds, and if you're a woodworker, there are lots of things you can do that lend yourself to bird watching, like building feeders or birdhouses. So there are lots of different ways that you can use birding as a hobby and also as a program for the public. I think it's very interesting. Birding as a hobby really developed in the 20th century. Prior to that, most people that were birders were most likely professionals, and an unfamiliar bird was usually identified in hand after you shot it. So, I mean, one of the things I like to tell people that only Frank Perdue killed more birds than Audubon, because he was shooting them so he could identify them. And then primarily that was because, one, they didn't have the optics that we have today, and two, they didn't have guides that could help them. So in the 19th century, really one of the landmark things that spurred on birding was Roger Tory Peterson's first field guide that he published in 1934. And there had been books before on birds, but they were usually just illustrations of a bird and perhaps taken from a mount. And Peterson took a different step, and he did illustrations of birds and highlighted field marks that you should look for. And in fact, if you look at these bird guides, you'll see the illustration of a bird, and then there are little black stripes that point you to things that you need to look for. And this really helped turn around birding and became much more popular because people could go out and do it and actually figure out what they were seeing. And it's a great hobby, and it's something that any park or nature center can offer. Although one thing I would say that you really should have if you're going to offer a birding program is you should have somebody that is familiar with your local birds. I think it would be a mistake to try to send somebody out that's not a birder or has a strong interest in birds to try to lead a bird program. Because when you do offer a birding program, at least for the general public, you're going to get some people that are pretty familiar with what's out there. And birding can be done anywhere. I think the one thing you have to consider with a birding program is to do a good program, you want to have good habitat. And often the best habitat is a place where you have more than one habitat coming together. So a field along the edge of the woods, water always brings in more birds. And to get started at a center, I would highly recommend having some kind of a feeding station. And ideally, you'd have a feeding station that you can see from your building with a nice viewing window. You want to pick some place where there's not going to be an awful lot of foot traffic. You don't want to have your bird feeding stations by your front door where people are going to be coming and going. But some place where you can view birds, some place that has some cover. And evergreen cover is best because a lot of the feeding is best done in the wintertime. And a feeder is great for beginning birders because, one, you have certain species that are routine at bird feeders that people can become familiar with. And two, it's very easy to see them. So you can sit inside and look at your birds. Some places have bird blinds that might be a short distance from the center where you could go, and you have feeding stations outside of either a wall, a viewing wall, or maybe a small structure where you can go and sit and quietly watch the birds coming to your feeders. When you're setting up a feeder, you really can put almost anything out there for food, but they do prefer certain foods. So if you're going to set up a feeding station, you want to make sure you have some sunflower seed, some millet, maybe some type of a suet. And if you want to draw in finches, you want to have thistle. And they have special feeders designed just for thistle. And the illustration shows goldfinches, which are very attractive birds in the summertime. Of course, in the winter, they're not going to look quite so bright and colorful. But in the winter, you can draw in some unusual finches that just might visit us from up north. So feeding stations, absolutely, if you can do it. It's a great way to introduce people to birds. We're actually here in the city, we're trying to promote some of our recreation centers looking into having feeding stations for their after-school programs as a way of getting kids that may not be so familiar with nature to have something that they can get involved in and observe birds and have a little outdoor experience. So there are lots of ways you can get people looking at birds. You need to pick a spot. Probably it's going to be near where you are. I'm working here in Philadelphia, and people might think Philadelphia is not the greatest place to see birds, but actually it's great because, one, we're on a flyway, and there are flyways that birds use in migration. And in Philadelphia, a lot of the city is not really very attractive to birds, but where you have green space and these birds are migrating, they drop in on your green space, and often you have a better concentrations of birds here in the city of Philadelphia than you might have in the wide open spaces of other parts of the state. So it's kind of an interesting situation we have here. I wanted to give a couple thoughts on if you were doing a birding program, per se, let's say for a group. And we do a lot of birding programs with school kids, with rec centers, maybe with a scout group. And one thing I would discourage is trying to get very young children using binoculars. I've found that once you get down to maybe 10 or 8 years old, kids will have a real tough time managing the binoculars, and it's more of a distraction than really a help. And even grown-ups often need to be instructed on how to use binoculars properly. When I take teenagers or college students out on a birding program, the first thing I do is I give them the binoculars. I tell them what they have to do to care for them, so they can't hold them by the strap and swing them. We've had binoculars damaged that way. They need to understand that how the binoculars focus. So most binoculars have a center wheel, which moves both eyepieces, but then also most binoculars have one eyepiece that also can be adjusted. And the first thing you need to do is look at something. I like to pick a tree trunk or maybe a sign in the distance, have them look through the fixed lens, which is usually the left lens, and looking through the left lens, use the center wheel to focus in on what you're looking at, and then close that eye and open the right eye and use the eyepiece to focus that lens so it is as focused as possible. And now your binoculars will be focused for you, and now you only have to use the center wheel to focus in on the birds. The other mistake kids usually make when you go out with binoculars is they're trying to find things with those binoculars, and that's really not what binoculars are for. Binoculars are to bring something in closer. You need to find things with your eyes. So you need to look with your eyes. And then really what you're looking for is movement. So you're looking for the movement of the birds. If the bird is moving, you need to follow that movement to where it lands, and then you use your binoculars to bring it in closer. But really it's important to remember, use your eyes to find those birds. The binoculars are just a tool to bring them in closer. probably the hardest thing for people that are just beginning is there are so many birds you could see. And once you get beyond your feeder birds and you go out looking at birds, there's so many birds that they might see. A guide, of course, is very important, and I'm very particular to the Peterson Field Guide series, and I often recommend to beginners the older editions of the Peterson Guide. The one that's shown in the webinar, I think, is the 1947 edition. And the reason I like that is because they have many similar birds on one page. So you can look at one page and you can see a lot of birds that are similar to what you might be looking at, and it's a help. And again, they have these little dash lines that point you to a field mark that, again, will help you. One other thing I usually tell people when we go out, when you see a bird, you have to use your mind to sort of mentally think how big it is. And there's sort of a scale, which is sort of a standard scale that people can use with birds that most people would be familiar with. And the scale is basically a sparrow, which most people know what a sparrow looks like in general and what size it is. A robin, which I think everybody knows. A pigeon, which everybody should know. And a crow, which everybody should know. And that's your size scale. So when you see a bird that you don't know, one of the first things to do is think to yourself, how does this bird compare in size to a sparrow, a robin, a pigeon, or a crow? That gives you a start. Of course, there are many things to look at, and it's one of those hobbies that even people that have been birding, well, I've been birding for many, many years, and I still go back to the bird guides and have to study up on some of this very small field marks that you need to look for to identify a bird in the field, because you often only have a very short time to see that bird. The other thing I always tell people, you go out, they want to see a particular bird, you often don't see what you're looking for. And I always feel that if you don't see something, I just tell them it makes it even better when you finally do see it. If you have to search for something for years and then you finally see it, it's sort of exciting. It makes it rewarding. What else would I supposed to talk about here, Samantha?
Well, Pete, just to mention that, or for our participants here, that some of these Peterson Field Guides, even particularly the old ones, like the 1980 version, they're available on Amazon for a lot less money, sometimes as much as $1 or less.
Oh, I know. You could. Yeah, I rarely would go buy a book at a bookstore because you can these days. You can go search online and find them.
Right.
Now, I have to say I also looked online and looked up Peterson's first guide in 1934, and that ranges anywhere from $100 to one person was asking $12,000 for a signed edition. But I doubt if the beginners would want that anyway.
So, Peter, if a community organization would like to offer birding programs and they don't have staff capacity at this point, or don't have a volunteer who's really good at or feels comfortable leading bird programs, what are some ideas of some partner organizations?
Sure. Well, I mean, across Pennsylvania, there are, and I looked online, there are over 30 either local Audubon chapters or bird clubs in Pennsylvania, and that might be the first place to go. To just look online for a local bird club or an Audubon society. Those places would have birders, and some of those birders might be interested in helping lead a bird walk. Another avenue to go to would be to look on the eBird program, which I don't know if we're going to get into that too much, but eBird is something that anybody interested in birds should take a look at. But you could use eBird to look at your local county in Pennsylvania, and you can actually search for people that have been out looking at birds and recording them, and you can narrow it down to Pennsylvania. You can narrow it down to your county in Pennsylvania. Look on eBird for recent visits, and it'll show you names, and you can see how well they're birding. You can look for somebody that has recorded lots of species in your county and figure out how to contact them. Now, I will say you cannot go directly to eBird. You can't contact those people through eBird unless you go to the administrators, and then they might be able to send you contact information. I've used eBird sometimes to try to find birders that could help me with the Christmas bird count in December, and seeing local birders that I know are out there. They're recording birds, but I've never had them contribute to a bird count, and so it's a resource that's out there.
And we also have the Get Outdoors PA website. On the partner portal, we have a bird instructor resource. We have an instructor database which you can access and search for all different kinds of activities and see who does what, which we have a screenshot up on the screen right now. So that would be a resource for you. We also had a question while Peter was talking about whether or not we recommended a certain field guide, and Peterson was the field guide that was recommended by all of our speakers.
In general, I would recommend a guide that has illustrations rather than photography. And the only reason for that is usually the illustrations, whoever's doing that illustration is emphasizing what you need to look for. Whereas a photograph, it might be great, but it might not emphasize what you need to look for in that short time you might have to look at that bird. And I know a lot of birders that have dozens of different field guides and home guide, bird guides that aren't field guides are large and things to look at home. But to start off, like I say, I'm very partial to the older Peterson guides.
Right. And then one of the other tools or resources that we wanted to point out to you is that Get Outdoors PA has, for the last couple of years, had a mini grant process, and it will be open to community partners approved before 2017. And they'll be opening at the very end of 2016 into early 2017, this year's grant round. And that can pay for 50% match, $3,000, and you can either pay for funding for equipment or training, so that's something to take a look at on our website. We have information on there, and we'll also be sending out information in the partner resource newsletters or e-newsletters that we send out. I just got a note again about equipment, and Stephen, who's going to be talking.
I see one person asking about binoculars.
Yes, somebody's asking about binoculars, and just to make note here, Steve said his field guide of choice is the Sibley Guide to Birds of Eastern North America.
And I have to say, I probably use that more than Peterson.
Okay, all right.
For a beginner, the Petersons, you can't go wrong. Binoculars is a whole other issue. The only thing I would definitely say is I'll get a lot of people coming for bird walks with the little tiny pocket binoculars, and they're really difficult to use for birding. You have to remember the power. Usually they run from anywhere from 6 power to 10 power for binoculars, and then they would have another number next to it. So a standard binocular is 7 by 35. The 7 is the power. The 35 is the opening, the size of the opening, which is allowing light to come in. And they usually say you want to have that ratio, 7:35s, to have enough light to see the birds that you're looking at, especially when you have cloudy days or early morning or at dusk.
Right, and we will. I'm sorry, finish up.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, when we do programs with the public, we do have binoculars to lend. They're not terribly expensive binoculars. They run around $75 a pair. And if you're going to be lending binoculars, it's nice to have the number that you need of the same variety. So when you're explaining how to use them, everybody has the same mechanism, because there is some variation in how they focus and where the individual eyepiece is or the power. So.
And if you all see, Stephen was posting some stuff in the chat box, just saying a decent pair of binoculars can be purchased at sporting goods shops, nature stores, Walmart. They are not typically required. Binoculars are not typically required by every participant to do a program. So, and we'll have either Mick or Steve touch on that a little bit more, because we're going to be moving next into public programs, and we're going to have Mick and Joel talk about public types of programs, and you can touch on what you provide or what you expect in terms of equipment. So, Mick, do you want to get started?
Yes, in regards to the public morning bird walks we have listed here, this year's we had about 4 or 5 weeks just recently, and I personally, because of a schedule conflict, was unable to facilitate any of these programs with Joel. So Joel did the programs himself with the groups. So I'm going to turn the morning bird walks over to Joel at this point.
All right, hi everybody. So morning bird walks are something that a lot of nature centers and a lot of environmental education centers do, and I by no means did come up with this idea, but so during the fall and the spring, they're the most exciting times to watch birds because of migration. And so I just got the idea of having people just meet us at the preserve on the weekends, in the mornings, and just go out and see how many birds we could possibly find for the month. And so I kind of framed it like that, as a challenge to the public to see how many species we could get. And I just rate it really, really informal. You just show up, and it's really kind of based on the participants' interests, and if they show up. So if they want to go on a longer walk and see how many birds we can find, that's great. If they want to just get really familiar with the birds at the feeder and around the pond, that's great too. The whole idea is just to get as many people as you can birding, and familiar with the local organizations and societies that are involved with birding. So like the Audubon chapters here at Strawberry Hill, just trying to get as many people birding as possible. So public morning bird walks are definitely not the only thing you can do. Owl prowls are very, very popular. Almost every morning bird walk I had participants asking about owl prowls. So I'm going to turn over to Mick, because he's done a few of those for the preserve.
Okay, in the past we usually have done 2 or 3 owl prowls per year. We usually start out with a little bit of a preface on this regarding the biology, dispelling some myths about owls. We get into their habitats, how to identify different owls, what owls are prevalent in Pennsylvania. We talk a little bit about the saw-whet owl migrations. It's pretty much interactive, very question and answer oriented here. And then after that, we, of course, go out in the woods, and this is done at night, usually in the wintertime when we have snow on the ground. We try to go into areas where owls are known to be or might be hunting, and we use owl calls sometimes to see if we can get a response. Usually we do. Normally the owls that we hear are great horned owls. Occasionally we'll hear barred owls. And then we get into, of course, question and answer while we're out on the trail. And these groups might be anywhere between 10 to 25 people at a time. And I encourage anybody that's interested in trying to mimic an owl in order to get a response, as opposed to me using a call. I do. And, of course, that keeps it a little bit more interesting and kind of inspires a certain amount of social interaction between the participants. It also gives us, the participants, an idea in what type of habitat these owls are likely to be in, and then we discuss where they might be staying at in the daytime and where they will be going to at night to hunt, what they hunt. If we're lucky, we might see an owl, particularly a saw-whet or a screech owl, resting very low on a branch on a tree somewhere, although that rarely ever happens, because if you have snow on the ground and it's a little bit crunchy, and you're making a fair amount of noise, then I discourage discussion and making any more noise. Plus, I also tell people, the significance of using a flashlight with a red lens on it. That way you don't lose your night vision with the red light as opposed to a pure white light. And then, of course, when we get back to the preserve later on, then we pass out some information and flyers on how to attract owls, and that we really encourage, particularly with barn owls, we really encourage that, and what kind of foods they like, et cetera, and then give them some reference resources as to where they can find out more about this. As far as the nature photography goes and how it applies to birding, I'll try to make this as brief as possible. There's usually 2 or 3 items that come up in people's minds. Is number one, what kind of equipment do I need? Most people are very, particularly the beginner or somebody that's never done it before, I tell them straight out, you don't need several $1,000s worth of equipment to do this. If you have even a small point and shoot with, particularly the super zooms that are available now, they have some wonderful cameras out now that years ago I've actually used a few of them and had photos published for Mid-Atlantic Fly Fisher and some of the other outdoor magazines that were taken with my experiences with the P500s and the P510s that Nikon made. Of course, other manufacturers make them as well. And in a very small package, you can have a zoom that goes from 24 millimeters, 35 millimeter power lengths, up to about 1,000 or 1,200, or some of them go up to 1,400 to 1,500 or more now. That's a good introduction for someone. I encourage them to use any equipment they currently have. They might be surprised with the results that they get. I tell them if they do want to make that step into a DSLR or something with interchangeable lenses, that there's certain things to consider. I don't recommend going to a full frame camera. I do recommend going to something with what's called an APS-C sensor. That's about 2/3 or 3/4 the size of a full frame sensor. And the advantage to that in bird photography is it gives you an automatic 1.5 cropping factor, which what that translates into in parlance that someone can understand, it's not familiar with it, is that if you have a 300 millimeter lens on your camera, with that APS-C sensor in there, you actually get, it turns it into a 450 millimeter. And if you have the 1.3 extra crop factor like I do on a D7100, that would make it 600. So you have a relatively light lens there, 300 millimeters, because with birding you have to be extremely flexible. 9 times out of 10, if you're going to be doing something like hummingbirds or even bluebirds or birds that are feeding young or whatever, you're not going to have that flexibility with a tripod. So a small lens on a camera with a DX sensor is extremely important. If you want to know more about this, I would recommend going online. There's all kinds of information available through Outdoor Photographer. They also have a magazine that's very good. Popular Photography has some very good articles on it, some guidelines there on which ways to go. And I'd also recommend, if you have access to a professional camera shop, to go in there and talk to those people, and they can give you much more information than you're going to find at, say, a big box store or something like that. The other thing to keep in mind with equipment is weatherproofing. Typically, I use Nikons. I have been using for years. I'm heavily invested into it. To get into something that's weatherproof, you're going to be talking about 4 digits or more for any kind of weatherproofing, unless you want to get some of the smaller cameras that are weatherproof. Another thing on that same subject is that if you're using the camera in the wintertime, like I do a lot of times, is that when you go to take it back inside, you're going to want to wrap it in something and put it into a box or your camera bag or something, so that when you bring it back into the ambient temperatures indoors, that it adjusts very slowly. Otherwise, you can have a problem with condensation, which electronics don't like condensation. If I was getting started in it now, I'd give Pentax a real hard look, because they actually have weatherproofing on a lot of their really less expensive cameras. Right now, I would say they're probably the best on weatherproofing on your mid-range cameras. Another thing is on the subject of bird feeders, blinds, that sort of thing, is I find with hummingbirds, using a bird feeder in conjunction with some sort of a blind, and it doesn't have to be anything particularly fancy. I mean, you could just set up if you have a clothesline handy or anything like that handy, that you can put up fairly near the blind, because even with 500 or 600 millimeters, to get really good photos of small birds, you're going to have to be working relatively close. So you want to put that up a couple days or a week ahead, so that they get used to the fact that it's there. Then you can hide behind that and then have little openings that you can shoot through. Another thing to keep in mind is learn how to use the manual focus, because I've found through the years that birds that are working very close, and I really see this with hummingbirds, they can actually see the autofocus beam coming out of the camera, and it will tend to spook them a little bit. So it's the nice thing about this is that the person that's interested in birding, it's going to be another learning experience for them if they've never done it before. And probably lastly on this, very important is, in addition to some of the techniques, is the blinds and the precautions to take towards cold weather, and some of the methods of shooting here is most photographers that do this will tell you that if you do have a DSLR, to shoot shutter preferred with an auto ISO. I tend to use program a lot because I'm using a pop-up flash or a backup flash because I'm shooting against some heavy backlighting, and the heavy backlighting can throw your meter off in your camera. If you're using the flash on there, it tends to counteract that, and your camera's going to actually meter for what the flash is telling it what to do. But it's a lot of touch and go. It's a learning experience for anybody that's not done it before. I would recommend taking a course in outdoor photography. I would also recommend feeding your mind with as much as possible on so you don't waste a whole lot of time. And the nice thing nowadays is you don't have to be worrying about wasting film. So I think this is an avenue with birding that a lot of people get interested in, but they're afraid to pursue it because they're afraid of spending money that they're never going to recover, or they're just going to make a lot of mistakes. And that's actually part of the process. You're going to make some mistakes. Moving into school programs here, most of the school programs that we do here, the three primary ones that I've worked bird programs into is we do have a bird program that we do here, largely with grade school and early high school and middle school kids. And we do supply them with binoculars, and it does tend to be a bit of a diversion for them. Of course, our objective here is keep it simple, make it fun. So while we're out there in the field with these kids, whether they have binoculars or not, is we focus on identifying songbirds in the woods by sound, because very often you're not going to see them. So if they can get into the habit of being familiar with those sounds, what they are, then they can pursue it from there. And it's amazing how they kind of catch on to that and how quickly they learn how to do that. The two other programs that we integrate birding programs into, one is a watersheds and wetlands program, which, of course, because of the habitat, they're going to want to know what's living there and what the significance of that is. Are these birds barometers of the quality of that environment in a watershed? And then also with our terrestrial animal programs, birds naturally fall into that, because when the kids are out in the woods, they'll hear these birds, or they might see a bird fluttering through the woods, and some of them can kind of guess what it is, but most of them can't. So that's a teaching opportunity for you. So in essence, some of these programs actually become a tool to move them into becoming interested in birding at a very young age. The feeder stations can be used as a means to help these kids identify birds, finches, some of the more common ones, particularly in the wintertime. And again, when we're doing other programs, we do maple harvest here, maple syrup harvest, and that sort of thing here as well. We normally have feeder stations up for bird counts, and it's a good time for the kids to see what kind of birds are coming around there. And half those birds they've either never seen before or they're very unfamiliar with. So I would encourage anyone that wants to pursue the photography into this or anything related to that to that's something you incorporate into almost any bird program, is to check out the resources on the internet or magazines, and most of the magazines, of course, now have online sources now, and to actually attend some of the school programs as an adult or a counselor, and then you can see what's actually going on and possibly take that methodology back home or back to your school with you. So at this point, Joel's going to be talking about crafty bird feeders and then the citizen science programs.
All right, so birding programs for younger and audiences and families should be experiential. That's really just the biggest part of it, is having your participants going out and trying to find birds, working their way through things. So involving problem solving and using field guides like we've talked about already, working through just really gives them experience, makes it something memorable. So I've found one of the easiest ways to do this is to involve citizen science, and there are a bunch of different outlets for that. So citizen science gets individuals involved in real science, so they're contributing real data to the scientific community, but they're doing it in their backyard or at their local nature center. So they're contributing to professional research, and for a lot of people, it can give them a greater purpose to what they're doing. They're not just going out and looking at birds to see them themselves, but rather to contribute to the scientific community. So I've used citizen science in a number of ways for public programs and school programs as well with birding. And some examples of that I can talk about. So Project Feeder Watch is something that the Cornell Lab of Ornithology runs, and it's during the winter months, which is really helpful because sometimes it's hard to find birding programs that people get excited about out in the cold. So you can do this in the inside watching your bird feeder. So where you're just 3 days a week going out, you're watching your bird feeder for a half hour and counting how many birds you see at that feeder. So if you just have your participants do this for you in a program, they can really hone their observation and ID skills, and you can kind of format it in a way to be very formal and investigation style that would really fit into some science standards and especially the NGSS standards for schools, so it would be really, really appealing to public school teachers in particular. Or you can just have it as a few participants sitting around watching the feeders and talking about what you're seeing. So you're contributing what that data of the birds you see. That data is going somewhere. It's not just for your record. You contribute that to the Cornell Lab, and they use it for a number of different things. And then creating eBird or iNaturalist accounts are kind of the same idea, except there are a lot less parameters. You can just go out and use your eBird account. You're just logging the birds that you see anywhere. And then iNaturalist is kind of a fun take on it. It's a little bit different from eBird, where instead of your reporting the whole suite of birds that you see in a given session, you're taking pictures of individual organisms and contributing them to citizen science. So iNaturalist is something that's really great people can do with their smartphones or iPod Touches. So if your facility, if you have iPod Touches to use, I know at nature centers I've worked at, we've had iPod Touches, and kids go out and take pictures of any bird or even plants they see. And then they can work their way through the identification and eventually contribute it, to citizen science. And the great thing with this is it sparks an interest for them to do it on their own. So I know once I got hooked on eBird, I wanted to use it. I started submitting bird checklists, sometimes 10 a day, after I really got into using eBird and got familiar with it. So it's something that can kind of make a challenge for people and give more of a purpose. And here are just, like we said, some screenshots from eBird. As far as equipment, binoculars, and another thing that we've found is pretty nice to have is a spotting scope with those feeder programs, because we can see the birds really up close, and you can see their sometimes striking features, and sometimes that's a really, really great experience for a participant who has not been exposed to birding before. So there you can see a least sandpiper, and that's a bird that's just 5 inches large. But when you look at it 60 times, it really can look pretty awesome. So that's a big ticket item, but it is something that you can get donated to you. So here at Strawberry Hill in March, I was able to get a spotting scope and tripod donated to the preserve just through sending some emails to different companies. So it might seem discouraging, but sending out just dozens of emails to different companies sometimes can lead you down the right path. And with that, I think that's pretty much turned over what
you, Joel.
To do here.
And Mick, both of you. Thanks a lot for all your suggestions. Now we'll move on to Steve from Pennsylvania Audubon, and he's going to talk about some of these bird counts and some specialty field trips.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the talk. I'm learning some things as well, so it's a lot of fun. Christmas bird count is one of the citizen science programs I'm going to talk about. There's actually two I'm going to talk about. One is more active, I think, and the other can be considered passive because you can do it from home. and they've both been around for quite a while. Christmas Bird Count is in its 117th year, and it was in response to a big hunt each year, and it was sort of countering the killing of birds, much like the Audubon Society itself, which was started, as you may know, really as a result of a culmination of things going on, but the primary thing was the killing of great egrets in the Everglades, which were used for their plumes in hats, which was the style around the turn of the previous century, I should say. And these feathers that were on the males during breeding season only were favored for hat ornaments, and the entire bird, of course, was taken for those feathers. You can't just pluck them out. So the Audubon Society was started as a conservation effort to counter that, and much like the Christmas Bird Count was in countering the killing of birds. So in this time, this data is analyzed, as Joel was saying. Is it used by ornithologists, especially in the last 50 or 60 years? This is sort of crowdsourcing at its best. This is asking volunteers to go out in the Christmas Bird Count. There are existing circles in the bird count. They're a 15-mile radius. You have compilers some have been doing the same circles for many years. I know Peter has been very active for a long time in his circle, and they're very serious about it. They have a job to do. They have to count the birds that they see, and Peter shared his perspective that, it's not really the ideal program for people who don't know birds, but I do encourage beginners to go, because I was a 14 and 15-year-old tagging along with my local Audubon chapter, and that's how I learned and fed my passion for birds. So if you find a passionate 14-year-old for birds, take them out on the Christmas Bird Count circle. Your park is more than likely part of the Christmas Bird Count already. If you want a circle or want to establish a circle, it can be done, and this next slide that I'll show will have some information on that. I do want to say that over the past 50 years or so, the Christmas Bird Count data just have tracked the northward spread of some formerly southern species, such as northern cardinal, for example, tufted titmouse, red-bellied woodpeckers, and Carolina wrens. And with the wrens, for example, you can actually track the fragility of their hold in the north, as we can see depressions in their numbers on certain CBCs after, an especially hard winter or two in the Northeast. So it really does contribute to bird conservation by telling us exactly what's going on. Snowy owls were tracked with an historic eruption in the winter of 2013-2014. A couple of them still make it down from the north, but not in nearly the numbers that we saw in 2013-14. Crossbills and other northern finches often make their way down here, pine siskins and common redpolls and a number of other finches, and it tells us what the status of the boreal forest is on a particular year. What is the cache of supply and food supply? And if it's low, then they'll come down here. Crossbills in 2012-2013 in particular had huge, big numbers, and that always sets birders out on a very exciting trek, because they're pretty cool birds. So those are some of the things we've learned through the Christmas Bird Count over the years. More to come, I'm sure. And all of that data is available online, as is establishing a circle. And I know the URL for this page will be available in your resource guide later on. But there's all kinds of information on the Christmas Bird Count site at audubon.org. You can really go back. You can pick a species and go back and see exactly what numbers were counted when and where. And there's lots of stories and just fascinating data online that you can research on the site. They keep it all up there so people can research it and use it university level and other things. Also want to talk about the Great Backyard Bird Count. This one's a little more passive, and I think a great way to introduce people to birds, because it's always held over President's Day weekend. So this year it's February 7th, or next year I should say, February 17th to the 20th. What I tell people is that you really only need to learn about 15 to 20 birds. Those are the main ones that show up in Pennsylvania backyards. And if you have feeders, great. You don't have to. You don't even have to count in your backyard. You can go out to a park. But it's an attractive program, because no matter the weather, you can sit inside your kitchen and look out at your feeders and count the birds that you see. and you put that information into a database which ends up in the eBird program. It gets rolled up. Last year, 162,000 checklists were submitted, and it went international last year, so we're talking about not only just the Western Hemisphere but beyond. And nearly 6,000 bird species, individual species, were listed on the Great Backyard Bird Count. And, this is a really great program if you have a nature center or a facility and you want to host an ID workshop. Because of the relatively small suite of birds that occupy our backyards in the wintertime, it's a great tool for educating people who are interested in backyard bird watching in particular to do so, to come to a workshop and learn those birds, learn how to count them, because everybody says, how do I count birds without counting the same ones over and over again? And it's a simple formula. But they come to these workshops to learn that, and they get involved. I just want to mention one other thing, and that is that Pennsylvania last year was the second highest state in participation in the Great Backyard Bird Count, behind California. We're always sort of in the top 5, and last year we made it to number 2. We do a lot of workshops in our bird towns, which are mostly in the eastern part of the state, and so we try to reach as many people as we can. And we only need about 2,000 more checklists to overtake California this year. So I encourage you to reach out to your local Audubon chapter, have them come out and do a workshop, or any of your local bird experts. Pick those 15 to 20 common birds that are most likely to show up at a backyard bird feeder, and have people learn them. And it's, again, a great tool for kids. They're home during President's Day weekend, which is why one of the reasons they picked that weekend to have it. And it's just a great tool, I think, for citizen science and for parks and other. And again, you can count birds everywhere. We have kids practice in school the week before the Great Backyard Bird Count. Then they bring it home and tell their parents about it. But you can go to parks and nature centers, obviously, and those the number of places and people is growing astronomically each year. And again, this is simple online data forms. When you put in your location, you'll only get a list of the birds that are typically found in that area. You can certainly add some unusual bird that may show up. The other thing that's great about both of these counts, really, is if a bird flies overhead, if a bald eagle flies over your backyard, you get to count it and put it on your checklist. Now, there are people analyzing and reviewing the submissions each day. You might get an email from Cornell or Audubon saying, are you sure you saw a bald eagle in your northeast Philadelphia backyard? And what will happen is you'll have to just say, yeah, I'm definitely sure, and maybe even describe it. And if they fly overhead, again, it's totally countable. We partner with libraries and schools, nature centers, and all kinds of facilities, and all of these pictures are of those various partners and entities that help promote not only the Great Backyard Bird Count, but bird watching in general. We do a number of school programs. We have art contests, photography contests, and just lots and lots of presentations to get people out and learn about what's in their backyard. My program, Bird Friendly Communities, and the Audubon Home program in particular, is to try to help people create great habitat for birds. So I think it was Peter who mentioned evergreens or conifers in your backyard, to have some winter cover so that birds feel safe when they're coming in and eating. And it's a great tool to use for your audience. And I think I'm passing this on to
Steve. Outdoors. This is just an example of an autumn bird walk that is going to be held next weekend. That's shown up on our Get Outdoors PA calendar. And this is an example of what you might be able to do as a program partner who has an interest in doing something. The calendar is a great place to go and look at what others are doing to help you make decisions on what you want to do if you want to do a birding program. So this is just a screenshot of a fairly typical type of event.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, and we have we put out something called the Bird Town Flyers, a newsletter. I try to list every citizen science related bird count event, whether that's a talk or the actual walk itself. And there's obviously there's 26 Audubon chapters statewide, and they all more or less have a newsletter or some form of communication. The count is December 14th through January 5th each year. Yeah, it can be cold out there. It's definitely, it's generally in natural areas or on farms. I remember counting snow buntings on at 20 below zero one year. So, it's a more active citizen science program, but for people who are passionate about birding, it's really the next step. It really is a sort of continuum of conservation and really important information for scientists, not citizen scientists, but the actual ornithologists who analyze that data each year. Thank you.
So this is the opportunity for you as participants to ask questions, and we have some additional resources on here. We've also been listing websites in the chat box, and they will be available. Emily Gates from PRPS, who's been helping us out today doing the background stuff, we'll be posting that on our website. So do any of you have any questions? I know we had a few questions throughout the session, and I know it had to do with equipment, binoculars, and then we did have the speakers answered and responded to some of those, talking about different places that you could get equipment, field guides, binoculars, things like that. But so this is the opportunity for you to ask questions. Is there anything else to wrap things up? We've got just a couple of minutes here left. To any of our speakers, Pete, Mick, Joel, Steve, any of you have anything that you think was not mentioned?
This is Pete. I was just going to mention we had talked about opportunities for programming to take trips to highlight places that might attract birders, usually birders, but sometimes beginners. And we try to maybe do one trip or two trips a year, and we might go to some place well-known like Hawk Mountain. We took a trip this spring down to the New Jersey Bayshore when the horseshoe crabs were laying their eggs and the shorebirds were coming to eat them. So these are things that are popular. If you have a vehicle where you can put a dozen people or so, it makes for a nice size field trip and a destination that's close enough, but enough of a drive that people enjoy sort of the camaraderie of going together and going off on a day trip. So it's just another opportunity for something a little more adventuresome for your audience.
That's great. Thanks, Pete, for adding that. All right. Well, if there isn't anything else, we have the speakers' names and contact information up there. Continuing education credit quiz. If you're getting your CEUs, make sure you take the quiz at the end here. You will be able to access the presentation and other programming resources on the partner portal, and we have that information up to date. Make sure you visit our website in 2017 for upcoming webinars. And if you are not a partner of Get Outdoors PA currently, please consider joining and becoming a partner. You will be eligible for our mini grant program as long as you apply before the end of the calendar year. There's an application available online. And for those of you who are community partners, we want to remind you to post events on our calendar. Our calendar is only worthwhile to the public as the number of events that we have posted on it and the number of partners we have. So that's really important. And the bird watching, you can also take some of the techniques and skills and things that you learned today and apply that to other types of wildlife viewing. But I think that's it. We'll leave this final slide up there. And if you have any other questions that you want to chat to us, you're welcome to. And if not, enjoy the rest of this lovely fall afternoon. Thanks so much, all. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, folks. I think I'm going to go out and look for some birds.